Are there any common traps hostage negotiators tend to fall into, and how do you advise them to avoid or get out of these challenging situations?
So one of the traps that I think is really common when we talk about hostage taking is this widespread notion of a no concessions policy. I think a lot of people assume that the United States has a quote unquote no concessions policy when dealing with hostage takers or kidnappers, which is actually not the case and has never actually been the case, but is so common in public conversation about hostage taking that it can sometimes mislead the public, the media, decision makers when they're trying to figure out how to bring captives home. There are lots of reasons to have a policy that verges on a no concessions policy. It is quite distasteful to reward your adversaries for just arbitrarily, unlawfully, violently, quite traumatically taking someone and holding them against their will to use them as a bargaining chip. Every part of that is abhorrent and objectionable. And so the idea of rewarding them can be grotesque, but making those concessions frankly works to bring captives home. I think as seasoned negotiators who work on things that aren't hostage taking well know that you have to give up some things that you might not want to give up if you want your broader interest to be satisfied. And so if the broader interest is getting the captive back, sometimes that's what you have to do. There's also this idea that the reason not to make concessions is that it might incentivize future hostage taking. The idea is that if hostage takers learn that taking hostages is not profitable for them, they won't get their ransom payment, they won't get their prisoner swap, they might stop doing it in the future. And there's a few big problems with those assumptions. One is that it's never really worked. Countries and governments that have tried to have a no concessions policy have never been able to stop the practice of hostage taking. It's old as the written word itself. And there's always going to be somebody who's willing to pay when it's their loved one or their citizen whose life is on the line. And so thinking about preventing benefits to the hostage taker has not ever really worked. And so the big trap that everyone is falling into and that we really have to work our way through, that governments are thinking about a lot right now, is what is the way to bring hostages home to help the hostages of today without endangering the potential future hostages of tomorrow, right? Is there a way to simultaneously solve today's hostage crisis without incentivizing future hostage crises? And so there's a newfound effort to separate those two problems, right? Can we make concessions today? Can we make the hard decisions, have these very difficult negotiations with unsavory partners and adversaries, and find a way to prevent it going forward? And that's a trap that I think policymakers and negotiators are starting to work their way out of, but we have a long road ahead.